All right, you guys. So this webinar is all about AKC buried searches, tips and tricks. This originally was put together in 2021, and I've been updating it as I go along, sometimes offering it here and there, but it's been a little while since I've offered this very specific webinar. So I thought it was kind of fun to throw it into the webinar kind of week because a lot of people struggle with this element. And with the recent changes, everybody's trying to figure out what's going on, what are we going to see, all that kind of fun stuff. It was kind of nice timing that they were able to get their AKC meeting in together before the webinar happened so that I can give you all the most up-to-date info. It hasn't been run yet, so we probably could get some adjustments because they don't always think out everything all to the extent that it needs to be because it's a small panel. So we might have some changes, but we should be pretty good. We'll see. All right, so what we're going to do is we will look at how to set it up, what is the current way, and that was what they changed in AKC, and updates. And then we're going to look at common issues that arise for buried searches, and then finally training solutions that you can use in order to succeed at this element. And it's things that I have used in order to do my own training. And my dogs do really great. I find a lot of my students do pretty good as long as we can get enough reps in with this in mind. And so that's really what we're aiming for. All right. So, how is it set? What are we looking at? What does it look like? All that fun stuff. The first piece is sand. It is mesh T-ball. And what they've added to is it's between 1 and 2 inches in diameter. They have specified this now. It used to be a little bit more open. And so now it's between 1 inch at the lowest end or 2 inches in diameter. So essentially, the T-balls that a lot of us have been using as judges are still legit. The hang up is in how much sand that you have. And so what's happening is a lot of judges are trying to figure out, can we actually purchase 1 inch diameter T-balls? And right now the answer is no. So I don't know how they're going to answer that piece. There's a lot of kind of thoughts and workarounds, and we'll see what AKC says about that. They still have basically another month to figure it out, or we all just kind of fly in the dark of what we think should happen, which can happen. Water, they did make a significant change. They got rid of the suction cup and the tube. So when you're doing your buried searches now, you will no longer see a suction cup and a tube at the bottom of the container. That has been completely gotten rid of, which is kind of a nice. I know I've stopped at a Walmart on my way up to a trial at one point because we couldn't have enough suction cups, and it's one of those kind of hard to find items. So kind of a good thing. We'll see how it pans out. I think it probably isn't going to be a big deal based on how I typically train, and it's essentially doing what they've now changed to. So it's kind of nice. The container themselves, I have not seen a change in this, but it is a 16 by 11 inch container. Height is about 5 to 9 inches tall. We might see less. I don't know if I've ever seen a 9 inch tall container. They're normally about 6 to 7, but we could probably see more of the 5 inch kind of end of the spectrum because of the decrease in how much sand. The top is covered by a half sheet baking cooling rack, and so that needs to be secured to the top itself, and that's required so the dogs are not interacting with the substrate within, and that can be a little bit thing. As you're doing this for training, you might not need very specific, exactly what says in the regulations for trial. You can get away with some variations, and we'll go over that. So don't think that you have to have this. The only thing that, or the situations where I think it could be very important is if you have a very small dog coming up to the side of a container like this, that dog's nose, like a little wiener dog, a chihuahua, possibly my little one, she's going to be a little big enough, but they're going to come up to the side there where their nose comes right to the edge of the container and they cannot sniff inside of it so easily. For a dog that size, it could make sense to get a container that size so that they learn how to work with a container that size, right? If they are not able to work with a container that size, that can be a big kind of surprise when they get to that situation. All right. So with the containers themselves, we have sand and novice, water and advanced, sand and water, so two different types in excellent, and then in the masters, again, sand and water, two different types. 12, so 6 and 6, and then 16, 8 and 8 for masters. Um, the only element or the level that requires a very specific formation is novice. Every other level can do any sort of arrangement whatsoever. So in the 8 containers, they can be 2 rows of 4, but they can be a big circle, they can be a U, they can be in one straight line, they can be random, whatever the judge is able to fit within that space. So something to keep in mind as we're talking about this is the changes that AKC made. So with the change in what's happening here is AKC now says the sand in those containers still has to be play sand. It is a minimum of 2 inches, a maximum of 3 inches, with 1 inch of sand covering the scent vessel. And that's where we were kind of talking about if you have a scent vessel that's 2 inches in diameter, so you can't get it any shorter than that, then you would have 3 inches of sand to ensure that you have 2 inches above the scent vessel. So, in short, it's an inch less than what we're dealing with right now, which is it was 4 inches. You're seeing a lot of people pushing it on the internet to get it down to the 2 inches of sand, which is pretty nice when you're trying to carry around. It's half the weight that it used to be for competition. So it's something definitely to keep in mind as we're trying to go forward and figure out how to make the rules work and make it as easy as possible. The 2 inches of sand in a container is going to play a part, and it's going to be easier for volunteers in trying to set it up. It's also cheaper on sand, but it can cause some other issues that we'll talk about. Now, with the water in the water containers, it is still 4 inches. So it still requires 4 inches of water in every container. But now the scent vessel, we got rid of the suction tube, the suction cup in the tube. Now it's just half a Q-tip. In the hot container, it would be a hot Q-tip. In all the other containers, it's a cold Q-tip. That's it. So you have a Q-tip floating on the bottom. You will see the Q-tip, hopefully, maybe not, floating at the very bottom of the container. Okay. So that can change things. It's going to change how odor might escape into the environment. It might change how long it stays within the container as a strong hide. So that might be something that judges are going to have to figure out for a long day of judging the same element. So a lot of different considerations. I think there's going to be a little bit of growing room. It's much easier because all you have to do is drop it in. So we might have much less contamination. People are not opening and closing containers all the time. All you have it to do is drop the Q-tip within the container itself. So we'll see how that shows up. It's going to be interesting, we'll say. All right. So parameters, novice, 1 hide, advanced, 2 hides. So those are 2 Q-tips, 1 in each of the hot containers. Excellent is 3 hides, and then masters is 1 to 4. This is all kind of the same as what it's been in the past. So if you're new to AKC, this is kind of a good table to look at. This is also the same as what you can find as in the regulations themselves. Your time is very consistent, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and distractions are none, 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Keep in mind, AKC has a rule, 12 inches maximum between the distractor and your source. So if you have a distractor sitting on top of a buried container, so a toy sitting on the top, that's not a hot container. Don't call it. All right. So that is a rule. It's in the guidelines, and that can help you sometimes when you are struggling with things. Maybe the judge put a distractor on top of that container for a reason because it was contaminated or they just are having big trapping issues. And so they say, oh, just throw a distractor on it and then people won't call it. So just be aware of that. That's often why something like that happens.
Hey, Alex, so the distractors are not inside the container,
They
right?
cannot be. Yeah.
Okay.
So they're going to be on top of the screen or on the ground around it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, somewhere in the rules it says that it cannot be submerged, and that gets interpreted by the judges as if you put something on the top and it even slightly submerges, there is a potential that you are now like illegal, right? Can we not eat this? Thank you. So it is something to consider. Like, I think it would be fun to have like a little floating rubber ducky inside of it, but not necessarily legal. So, no, no, no. Sorry. I'm having puppy problems with microphones. Okay, so summarizing the changes, the amount of sand has changed from 4 inches down to 2 or 3 inches of sand, as long as you've got it 1 inch above the T-ball. And then suction cups and tubing are gone. Now it's just a Q-tip placed in the container, and the container itself with the Q-tip in it is considered your scent vessel. Okay. So let's go into where things can go wrong. You are about to get put on the ground. When we talk about buried containers, the most difficult thing about buried containers is that the screen is a barrier. We are basically talking about an inaccessible hide. And because it's an inaccessible hide, the point of highest concentration is not just nose on source, it's understanding that it's within that container somewhere. We don't really know where, but it's somewhere within that container. And that can be difficult for a dog that has always been doing nose on source. This is why I do for my students, we teach a lot of container work before we start buried. Because if we go straight into buried work, it's easy for the dogs to start thinking that we can fringe alert, so alerting away from source, or that they start degrading and getting frustrated with buried containers when the odor is not quite as strong as maybe they were training with. So it's just something to consider. The confidence will go down, stress response. So you might see more sniffing in the ground, itching, things like that, so that they're trying to avoid the situation. Okay. Dispersion of the odor prior to reaching up to the top is another kind of situation that we do have to consider. So as it's coming up, it's not coming up straight in the middle, especially now that we're talking about we're reducing 1 inch or 2 inches of sand from this container. Now the amount of space between the grate and the sand itself has increased, and that can make it even more inaccessible than what it was before. With the water, now that it is just a Q-tip within the water itself and floating around, it is no longer guaranteed to be in the middle of the container. Before, with the suction cups, mostly that's going to be in the middle of the container, right? And so now that we have the Q-tip just floating, it can be on the edges, probably more likely. And that will change. If your dog sniffs one side of the container, it might change their perspective and they may dismiss it and have to come back because it could look more like pooling than source in that container. Little things to just kind of consider. I don't usually see that problem, and I train that way with a tube floating, but it's really no different than a Q-tip just dropped into the container itself. So I think it will be fine, but it is something to consider within the whole situation. All right.
May I,
So, yeah,
may, may I interrupt with a question
yeah,
from total ignorance?
go for
When
it.
it, when it's in sand, can it be anywhere within that container or is it always in the middle?
It is in the middle.
It's in the middle. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It should be in the middle. That's how the rules are written anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. All right, so then let's talk about odor availability. How much odor is actually available from those hides as they're sitting in the space? Things to consider. Aging. How long the hide sits in sand or water can change how much odor is available. When we were talking about 4 inches of sand, the longer it sat, it actually became a little bit more stable because there was more sand that was absorbing the odor. I do believe that now, once we're getting only 1 inch of sand above the mesh, that space between the mesh and the surface is so much less. There's less sand there to absorb it. It might not be quite so much, but I think we're still probably going to see very similar kind of situation. Sand is just going to hold that odor so much more easily, and source is going to be much more clear. Um, it could be a little bit less precise, but it's going to be pretty good. Now, when it is cold out, it can take longer. I think that's going to be reduced slightly. It's going to be a little bit better now that we've got less sand sitting on top of each one of those hides. So that's good. Something I do see, and it's probably going to be a little bit better, is the sand settling. Every time the foot of the dog hits that container, just as they're walking by or an alert or whatever it might be, that can settle that sand, and the air pockets between each of the grains of sand get a little bit tighter and tighter. I do think that once we get only 1 inch of sand above that, it's going to be less of a factor. It's not going to be as big of a problem. And then longer to reach saturation, same kind of thing. The longer it is, possibly the harder it can be in order to do that, right? Okay. In water, you get oil slick. What does oil do on water? It goes to the surface and it expands across the surface. And so as a result, that can make it a little bit more easy to find because your odor is very easily found, but it can put out a lot of odor as well. So evaporation of the water allows for a larger surface area for that oil to also evaporate. And so if you've got humidity in the environment on a neighboring container, it is very easy for some of those molecules to attach to the neighboring containers, making the outside of those containers have some odor on them and be somewhat hot, right? So it is something to consider as we're working through them. And normally when I see a lot of pooling problems, it's because of the water, not because of sand hides. Something that is out there, and I saw a post recently from a judge that said that their sand or their anise was not affected by the cold as much as a different variety that they had got from a different company, which makes me wonder what the mixing agent is because anise does have a congealing point that is above like freezing. And so it will become a hard substance, kind of jelly, at kind of a substance that's a little bit, I think it's like 10 degrees or something like that, Celsius, whatever that is in Fahrenheit. I was looking at the science part. But as a result, if you put your anise in the fridge, it gets hard. And if we consider putting anise on a Q-tip and then allowing that Q-tip into the cold, cold water, it might congeal. So that would take longer for that anise to interact with the environment and or within the water environment and be able to come to the surface and get to your dog's nose. So you might need a little bit of warmth to activate that. And I have actually seen that where it was really cold out, it was not working. The hide was not working whatsoever. And then as soon as I put just a little bit of hot tap water, I was lucky. I was in like a big building with hot water right available. And we just made sure that that temperature of the anise hide was above whatever temperature it needed to be. It was just a little bit of warm water, probably a capful. It was enough. And it kept that hide performing perfectly for everybody. So it is something to consider. The temperature can affect that. Let's see. The whole surface area is source, so if your dog is used to a finite point to get to, that can get a little bit confusing for them if they are not experienced on it. So that's something to consider. And then we talked about the neighboring containers could be hot because of blowing odor. All right, so then let's take a look at that pooling odor problem. So as the odor is blowing off of a hot container, look at that edge on the container itself. So this is the natural, like normal. They're normally white or clear. This one's blue. But that odor can catch within the edging of the container. And if it's really cold and you have condensation on the metal surface, you can also end up with beads of water that can collect some of those molecules as well. So if your dog is going to the neighboring container and saying, this is hot, where is their nose going? And that's what I want you to pay attention to because if the dog's nose is going into the middle of the top of the container, chances are they're not going to get that pooling problem. If the nose is going to the side of the container and sniffing along the edge and coming into the handle and saying, oh, this is the hot one, I'd be a little bit more suspect because that easily could be odor blowing in from a neighboring container versus from the container itself. We want them to inhale from the top versus investigate the side. So hopefully that kind of makes sense to you guys. All right. So then blowing and next door kind of situations is important to know. So here in this is a good example of airflow blowing straight across and down into these containers. But we can also have some pooling that can happen from the structure itself. So if airflow is blowing this direction and the odor maybe from this first container is coming into this pocket, you can have a lot of odor that might come this direction onto this container, which then is harder for the dog to track back. So even if they're experienced with pooling problems, we do need to expose them to different kinds of pooling problems where it might be bouncing off of walls and structures around those hot containers. Buried gets put everywhere. Buried is not like, oh, let's put it in the middle of the gym. It's like in the back alley, it's around a corner, it's on sidewalks, right? So as a result, we have a lot of structure typically around buried containers, and that can cause some additional problems, curbing, things like that. All right. So then we have air blowing. Here's a Phoenix trial. We've seen this a lot. This happens kind of across the whole country. Start line, we've got a vehicle in the way as a line of sight blocking because we're using a parking lot, and then a trailer on the other side as a line of sight blocking. We can only imagine the airflow that's coming around these vehicles and interacting with this very simple buried search. Well, it's not so simple when you have a wall with two structures on either side causing a lot of movement of the airflow and being less consistent. If both of these vehicles weren't there, it would be a straight line of airflow across, and the dogs would be able to solve it much more easily than when we have structures around it. When we work buried, we have to consider that often we don't have that very straightforward, simple situation where we just have airflow blowing straight across of a surface. All right. We also have air sticking. So here's a great example of bushes along the side and grass. Both of these have a lot of humidity. So odor may slip to where there's more humidity, especially here in Arizona. And when it goes to those areas with more humidity or a puddle, then the dogs might get stuck there. And they get stuck there maybe because of odor, but then they stay there because of distraction smells. And so we have to recognize, is my dog working odor? Can they come back? Or did it slip into distracted sniffing pee or neighborhood dogs or whatever it might be? So we have to recognize that piece of it and allow our dogs to work back. The worst thing that we can do is pull them off right away because we're worried about it. But at the same time, we have to recognize when do they stop working it and maybe start working something else. Then the last one is air sliding. And this is in they're like interlocking kind of panels in a gym floor. And they had plastic walls essentially as like visual barriers between this area and the next area. They were putting a lot of searches in the same space. Not uncommon, it can happen. But there's very little for odor to catch and hold with its environment. And so your dog is maybe chasing and wanting to leave your search area a lot in order to understand the problem because there's nothing really holding it or helping the odor to stay near the containers. It is slipping around a lot. And so that is something to consider when you come up to the start line. You go, oh, this might take us a little bit more time to work out the problem. And I might have to let them go wide, but stay within the search area and let them come back into it. So good things to recognize. Common faults that happen for buried. The first one is pawing containers. This is what caused me to retrain my alert behavior. This was the first AKC trial in Arizona, is where this photo was taken. Tana, at that time, we were allowed stockings on the tops of the surfaces. And so Tana put a little run in the top. We got a fault, and I said, never again. I never want to do that again. So I retrained it, right? You can retrain it, and I'll show you some examples of how to retrain it. Another option, if you do have a dog that paws and it's maybe a little dog or maybe it's not super big of a problem, it's normally when the nails go in for the drag and the paw drag. If it's just paw flat, normally it's okay, but you're going to still get some judges that will call it as a fault, and you just kind of have to take it unless you want to retrain it. But calling it a little bit earlier is not necessarily a bad thing, meaning some dogs are like, you didn't see it, you didn't see it. Okay, fine, I will tell you about it. And so now we've developed that paw alert. So we just have to recognize that we're causing that problem. All right. The second one is standing on the container. The best answer for this is to reward beside the container on the side you're standing. So often they're standing onto the container because the container is between us and the dog. And if the container is between us and the dog wants to get to us to get the cookie. And so as a result, they're standing on the container to get closer to your hand, closer to your treat pocket. If you can stand on the same side of the container, this is a normal container, but of a berry container, you're going to have a better chance of the dog not standing on it. You could move slightly away. That works too. And then making sure that you are rewarding your dog. As a judge, the most common times that I see that the dog is standing on a container is because the person is interacting more with the judge versus recognizing and being very present for the dog itself. So call alert, you don't even necessarily need to look at the judge unless you don't hear yes. And then you can reward your dog for that. So dropping treats inside. See this previous answer. Reward beside the container. Nothing worse than as a judge having to take the lid off, stop the whole trial, take the screen off, take the cookies out of the container. If it's a cold container, I can't touch it, so then I need a volunteer to do it, right? So we've got all of these extra little pieces. So yeah, you're going to get faulted for treats inside of a container for sure. And then the last one, and this is going to be for the higher levels, is calling the same container twice. This is the most common fault for the higher level containers other than pawing. And there's ways that we can manage this. The first one is trying to find a pattern before you start. There's not always a pattern, and that's something to recognize. If they're just two rows, cool, we can count them. We can say row left, row right, off of the start line. We could figure that out. But sometimes it's an interesting pattern. Maybe it's a big circle and we get lost of what part of the circle I'm at. And so if you can look before you start and orient to your start line, that will help you understand. Find some landmarks. So then as you find a hide, take a moment, orient back to your start and understand where am I before you continue. When you're watching your dog and you call alert, typically you have no clue where you're at. You're just following your dog. So it's a matter of staying alert. And while you're feeding, you have an opportunity. Your dog's in your control. Look around. Look at any landmarks. I look down next to the container. Maybe there's a crack. Maybe there's a really dry patch of grass if it's on the grass. You're looking around. Maybe it's a distractor at one of the containers nearby. And then orient back to the start. So you know where you are in relation so that if you come to that container again, you can do the same. Go, oh, there's that crack and there's the start line. I'm at the same container. And then the last one is just call it. Nothing worse than having a master's dog fail because they didn't call it because they said, oh, you already found that one. And it was because it was beside it or two over or similar location. So just call it. Who cares about the fault? Just take the hide. Okay. All right, so here's an example of a screenshot from a trial. You can see it's slick floors. There's a pillar in there, which is a little bit helpful. And this grid is sometimes easier because you can put labels basically on them. I can say A, B, C, and D row, and I could say 1, 2, 3, 4, hide from the top, right? So as I go through, I can go through my grid based on where the start line is and put in A3 or B2, whatever it might be. Personally, I find that a little bit more difficult, but it works really well for some people, right? So do whatever works for you. Hard part about this is if you get lost and you do not orient back to the start, it is hard to figure out what was A, what was D, what side did I start counting from? So make sure you figure that out before you start so that you understand that piece. You can also verbalize as you go along. So I'm also looking at different elements within the search area. There's an exit to the left here, pillar, the sunshade, and there's a door over there. Things that I could use as landmarks to try and figure out where am I and how do I get out of this space. So how do we train for success? How do we put it all together and understand, or for our dogs to understand what we're going on? First piece, and this is a training piece, don't fill it to the top. Okay, so many people fill it, what it used to be to 4 inches. Now water to 4 inches and 3 inches of sand. Don't do it. You're never going to use your buried containers because they're so freaking heavy that you never want to move them or touch them. Fill them max with an inch of sand. Now that we have basically the permission to have just an inch of sand above the T-balls, just put a normal hide in a tin or in a shrink tube and put it in the sand itself. It will mimic it. It will be totally fine. You don't have to worry about it. You don't need more than 1 inch of sand in your training containers. You also don't necessarily need full-size training containers. We talked about that already. Make it easy. The easier it is for you to do, the more likely you will be to actually do it, right? And that's the goal of buried is we just need repetition. And then don't bury it too deep. At the beginning, see how this is slightly indented into the sand? That's all I do at the very beginning for probably a first year of training burieds. And then do we need to add a little bit more difficulty? Cool. I'll put it just enough so the sand is covering it. We can get a little bit deeper than that, but we really don't need to do too much more. The dogs get it. They start understanding. If you get too deep and it is really buried in there, and the dog is starting to guess, they will use you and they will use other cues in the environment to try and understand the situation versus actually working the odor itself and being confident about their find. Can we not eat that? Okay. And then be creative. You do not need to buy those full screens, right? Those are expensive, the baking screens. So unless you already have them, you do not need to do that. You can be creative. You can find smaller containers. I put a ton of holes in this one. You could just put 4 big holes, right? Whatever you need to do in order to make it a little bit easier for you to play the game and work it and not break the bank because that's expensive. All right. So we can split through the behavior, making it easier, making our dogs less likely to get a fault because of a paw. And we can do this through building nose on top behavior. So I like to do this through creating a hole in the middle of the top, using cardboard as a lid that I can cut, that I can make work. And we're going to see a photo of this in a second. And then I also like to use a smaller container. You could do this. I know that this kind of hit the fashion for a while there, is to use just like a yogurt container in the middle. With the bigger dogs, I worry about it sloshing around, and I think you're kind of defeating the purpose a little bit. Cardboard has just been the easiest for me. With the recent changes, I think there's going to be a lot more odor available, which should make this element a little bit simpler for a lot of teams. But I think it's still important to teach that middle, teach that dog to want to get to the middle of things so that they are having clarity about what hide is source, right? So they don't have to guess that. All right, so let's watch this video. This video is basically me talking about using the cardboard and how I make that together.
All right, let's talk about burieds.
Can you guys hear that?
So here is the smaller version of buried container.
Yes.
It's filled about an inch. Doesn't even need that much. This is enough so that I find most dogs won't tip it over. But if you can get away with less, do less. So we've got the sand in here. When you have your hide, they'll sit just on the top for week 1, but then we'll add to the depth. This is a great surface. So it's just a piece of cardboard, been cut to the right dimensions, side to side, and then a little bit extra on either side. So this gives about an inch lift above the sand. You can probably even get away with 3 inches above the sand. But what I like is when you put it in there, it now creates a nice hole in the middle, and that's where they need to sniff. So you can use it just like this, or you can put an actual screen on top. This one is created from way early days in AKC where we actually had to have screens, but you can use just this normal white top and punch a whole bunch of holes in the top, and it will act very similarly to this. You can put this right on top of the cardboard, and now they still only have that one center location to sniff.
All right. Any questions about that? This to me has been the easiest way to do this. Good. Everybody can figure that out? Okay, cool. All right. So,
And
here is a shell game. So you could do this with a cardboard, let them start learning where to check. And then once that becomes like repetition and they're understanding where to sniff, then we can start building in the shell game. And you can do this with the cardboard on top, or you could do this without the cardboard if you think that the dogs are understanding where to sniff, or you can go back and forth. There's never a linear progression, right? So we can go back and forth, we can clean things up. And I really like this shell game in order to teach one how to sniff the right one and want the right odor. I find this is basically what I'm going to throw my dogs on before our November trial because they're not going to work any buried until then. They haven't worked buried since, I don't know, last June. So I will do a quick shell game with them because that is the fastest way to get them to understand, enjoy, and have fun with buried again after having a long time off. So let's take a look at this one. And this is training Tana right after the puppy. So she's pretty like pawsy. She had not done odor basically in 8 months. So standing on everything. Okay, thank you, Tana. So recognition of odor. I say yes, reward on source. I like reset cookies when I'm doing shell game because it allows for a lot of loopy behaviors. The dogs can come back in and start thinking again and start working through the problems. So she finds it, little recognition, and the head flip is what I said yes on. So now we're moving it around again. Now she's getting better with it. She's remembering what she's doing. We're getting a little head bob. And so her alert is to freeze. This is like the speed version of it because she already knows how to offer the freeze. So I ignore the paw, nose goes back down. I highly reward the nose going back down. Okay. If you have a pawing kind of dog, the more that you can ignore the paw and give no response, the less that they're going to offer it. If you add value by just saying no and pushing them off, it makes a game out of it. And sometimes the dogs are going to want to give you more. So just kind of a heads up and recognition of that. You get extinction bursts as well if they've been rewarded for it. So then the more likely that they get rewarded, then they're going to try and keep trying. You kind of have to go through it a little bit. I like these beat up old containers. I'm not worried about them. And they have a little bit more sand in them for that purpose because she was a little pawsy and I knew that she wasn't going to be thinking necessarily. Standing on the side could knock it over, but the weight can be helpful for a dog that's really pawsy. Okay. Question in the chat. Yeah, when the claws flip it. So I have done this with a brick in them as well and not a lot of sand. Okay. If you have that dog and you're really trying to retrain the buried, there's a few moments. The biggest moment is to really capture the nose on, the nose on, the nose on, nose on, and then they give a little thought with the paw, and it's easier to ignore it because you've got so many reps of the nose hitting it. But going back down to very few containers and kind of keeping it simple and very clear has been the easiest way to do that because Tana will get pawsy again if I haven't been training in a long time because it is her natural instinct. She wants to get there and it's claws in. And so I do have to kind of go back to that a little bit and ignore that, working into it and cleaning that behavior up. Yeah. We'll see what the new one does. It doesn't stop moving. All right. So, once the dogs understand to sniff the very top, they can catch themselves on it, and it makes it much more confident when you call it because they're not catching odor from the side of the container. You're seeing it from the top, even when the situation is a little bit harder. So here's a screen print or screenshot from a start line. I was letting her go in. I think I was doing demo for this one, but it wasn't my search, so I didn't know where they were. And as she's running over the top of the container, you can see her nose catch that odor. She flipped around, nose went to the middle, and I called it without ever taking a step. So that's kind of what we're aiming for is that the dog's putting their nose in the middle of the top of the container. It doesn't matter their speed, that they're able to still do that. Here is a video, and we'll see how this plays. Ooh, maybe. So this is demo. Robin's doing demo with Tana for me, but I want you to look at her nose as her nose is going over top of these containers. So she made a pass without really finding anything. Okay, we need to get to work.
Okay.
Watch how her nose is in the very center of that container. Because the nose is in the center, there's no question about, is that hot? Is it not hot? There's no questioning of the dog. So as she's going around, she says, oh, hi, Mom. Getting her back to work. You could see how she's putting her nose and skimming through to the middle of those containers and then settling in with the middle. And that's really what we're aiming for is that value of the nose going to the center, inhaling to the center. And I do think that having those cardboard kind of cutouts can really start creating that understanding because they kind of have to. Because if they put their nose to the side, they're not going to receive the same information with the cardboard on it than in the middle. And they're going to do what's easiest. And I do think that that's normally a shortcut that seems to help a lot with this kind of situation. All right. So then, biggest thing for this is repetition. The more repetition we can have with buried, the better the dogs are at with this element. And that is the hardest part because we don't like to bring them out. We don't like to do a lot of repetition because it's just annoying and they're hard and they're a lot to pull out. And so as a result, we just don't do it. The more you can do it is the better. So if you've got an area like in your garage when you park and then you can pull them out easily when you pull out your car or a patio or something where you have 3 or 4 containers, you don't need a lot. You just need enough for shell game every day. And you will have a dog that is really quite strong and you can clean up behavior very quickly because all you're doing is shell game and it's fast and it's easy. You could also do shell game with one water hide and one sand hide. I do recommend if you have water out there and you're doing shell game of moving them around, you don't put in a lot of water. You put in just enough water so it smells like water. Okay. You're not filling it with water because that's heavy to move around and it sloshes and you're less likely to touch it and less likely to move it around. So you lose some of the elements. Also consider different kind of conditions. It's hot out right now, but if it rains, take advantage, go out, run it. The hardest buried I have ever set, and I've got a photo of it coming up, was in like 100% humidity on grass because it was all that was available. And it was a brutally hard buried search. It was very interesting as a judge, but it kind of sucked because my Q rate was 0. So it's one of those things of if it's out there, do it. Get on as many different surfaces. I find as desert dogs, grass is really hard to do buried on. The odor is different. It slips onto the grass itself. The dogs are working on grass. We're not used to it. We're not happy with it. So we're trying to get them off. There's a lot of different elements there. And so it's important to work all these different kinds of surfaces as much as we can, including airflow. So put it maybe in your driveway, but then pull out a vehicle and put it at the end of your driveway. Go to a park, especially now that we only have like this much sand in those containers. They stack and you can put them in a floorboard of a seat. They don't need a lot of space. And so as a result, you can go to a parking lot, park your vehicle so that it's creating these weird airflows that can happen because this is what makes a very simple buried search, like a novice buried, where the hide was very available, became very difficult. And it was because of the blocking, right? And that happens. That happens all the time everywhere. So we need to generalize that as much as possible. All right. Other kinds of challenges. Hard to ignore. Okay. So is grass the same as turf? No. So artificial grass is going to be not humid, right? Real grass is going to be humid. It's going to hold odor differently. Turf is going to act a lot more like gravel because of it's dry, it has a lot of structure to it, and it can like gather and trap odor, but it doesn't necessarily cause the same problems. What makes turf really difficult is dogs want to potty on it if you have allowed that and trained that, right? And so if that's how your dog's potty at home or is on artificial grass, they're going to be more likely to think about that. I think we're going to probably see a lot more turf surfaces as we move forward across the whole country because it's easier to maintain. It's cheap. Once it goes in, you're good. And so as a result, I do think that we're going to see more of it and it's worth training burieds on. And so it's something to consider. Grass as well, but I think that's depending on where you're at is whether you're going to see it or not. Other challenges that you might see out there is swirling because of a corner inside or out. So here's an example of a buried search that I had to lay out. It was hot. I want to say it was like 100 degrees this day. So I found every inch of shade that I could while keeping the distances. There are minimum of 3 feet between every container. And so we have to consider that as we lay those out. But trying to ensure not overlapping too much so we don't have odor problems that are inappropriate. But corners definitely are going to be there, pushed up against a wall. Sometimes we can have that they're very close to a wall because they're going down a sidewalk. Odor catching on neighboring containers. We've talked about that, but you can work that with a fan. Just put out a fan 10, 15, 20 feet away and blow hot water or odor from the hot container over other containers and then start downwind and let your dog move up that line and understand what that looks like. Or come in from the side and coming into the middle of that odor plume, they're probably going to change direction, but do they anticipate or do they work right to source, right? We can work with those different problems. You can blow it for a while, then turn it off and then run it. Or I have something, a Woozu fan, so they go up and down and left and right, and they constantly are changing direction. Something like that is really fun to play with pooling problems because it's always changing and it's variable, which is a lot like how our actual airflow is. And then recognizing pooling on nearby vegetation. Are we pulling our dogs off or are we allowing them to work that or are they getting distracted after they got there? All right. So here's that search that I was talking about where everything was wet. This was a photo taken after the search ran. And this was the first day. The second day was where it got really, really bad. But you could see there's a pond nearby. It's full on grass. It's pretty moist to start with. And then we had rain basically all night long. And it was just a fog that we were playing in. But this kind of situation, everything is wet, is going to be a very different kind of situation to play in. So if you travel for AKC or if you're in an area that has a lot more humidity than here in the desert, it's very important to be working these other conditions because it isn't the same game. And even the people who live there, when I set this up and have access to this, their dogs weren't used to working buried in those conditions because we don't do it. We don't pull that out. We don't work it. Is everything old? Are you running a search after it's been set for 5 hours? That can happen at big trials. Everything is super fresh. You're the first dog in and it's only been setting for 10 minutes. Is a distractor nearby? Minimum is 12 inches, but what if the hide is 16 inches away from your distractor? Can your dog still work it? Or does your dog go to the distractor, leaving the container and then continuing forward and you consider it not hot, right? So we have to consider those things. Some judges really like to do that and we have to train for it. And then keeping track of where you've been. That is definitely a thing that we have to do and we have to keep track of as we do these higher levels of competition. Other challenges that are important to work, make sure that we put it into our training regime, 2 hot containers with a cold between or 2 hot containers next to each other. The cold in between can get pooling. And so then we start doubting whether the dog is actually on the hide or not on the hide, which one is cold. So it is worth working. Also, 2 hot containers next to each other. I think we're seeing this a lot more and more. I'm seeing it pop up. And it's a challenge appropriate for the master level. It's not going to be an advanced. It's barely going to be an excellent. I shouldn't be, but it could. I think the convergence would be unreliable, but master's totally legit. Odor in a corner container. Does your dog skip corners? We need to put odor in corner containers. That is a very specific challenge that gets set. What if one was in the hot sun and one is in the shade? Right? That is a very different kind of hide. Even if they're both sand hides, your dog might hit the one in the sun very easily and not the one in the shade, or vice versa. If it's really hot and dry out, I've seen the dogs never find the hot in the sun, but have no problem with the one in the shade. And then handler interest. If we start thinking a container should be hot, our dogs likely, especially if it's difficult, are going to take our lead and try and do it. And they'll give us a false alert. Because buried is an inaccessible type of hide, it has an element of the dog slipping into handler suggestion a little too quickly. And we have to recognize that problem. So I do think it's worth working proofing for dumb handler kind of things, meaning I point out at the wrong one, or I'm walking away when they're near the hot one. Are you helping your dog into failure? Recognizing, do we like help by facing the wrong container or the right container? And they're using those cues. Where are you facing in general? Are you spending your time near a hot container or cold container? Like maybe in your training, you're always kind of near the hot ones, and then in competition, you're not and you don't realize it. And then we really need patience. So I have a video here. I think this is, I'm going to fast forward it, but this was from a buried search recently. The conditions in this space were brutally difficult. There are big fans. It's a warehouse. The sides all have food. It's a dog food warehouse. And so there is a lot of movement of odor everywhere. There's only a single hide in here. It's water, so it's probably expanding quite a bit more off of the surface. And it took 3 minutes in order to find that hide for Tana, who really understands. She's done many, many buried searches and typically has no problems whatsoever. Her typical time is about 35 to 40 seconds for a buried search. It took us 3 minutes. So you can see there's effective food, definitely an effective food as she's looking at this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed this up so we can see there's small little changes of behavior like there, worked it, lost it, went back into distraction, working that picture, going down the line, dismissing that it isn't down there, walking, working down the line, little question. So we're seeing a little bit of stress starting to pop up. Notice how when she gets to the containers, she is sniffing the very top middle of those containers. And because she's sniffing the very top middle, oops, sorry guys, um, it allows for her to gather that information, but she's not necessarily doing it on every single container. So could I be building a little bit more value on berries? Probably. It's probably been a while since she's done a lot. So here, like, is the suggestion causing the alert, or is the odor in the container itself? So I'm looking for more of an independent work. We can see this is very much sped up. She's starting to slow down a lot. I play with her because she's stressed. She's like, I don't know, this is really, really hard. At this point, I can tell you it's probably only one hide in this search area, right? There's not a ton of changes of behavior. We're looking at going down the line as much as possible. She finds little bits of odor information and then she doesn't know what to do with it. So a lot of question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. There's odor information. And I called that and we were like, done, finished. And that's how quickly it happened at the very end. So I'll slow that down because it is the most honest of all of it because it didn't have to do with me. So here, regular time, called alert, finish, we're done. Okay. So we could see that there are changes of behavior happening over here, little tiny bits of the edge of the odor picture, but the distraction's heavy. This could happen if you had grass where dogs are peeing on it all day long. This happens at conformation shows. So we could have very similar kind of situations that are not a dog food warehouse. The airflow with the fans above creating a very difficult kind of situation as well. Distractors all laying in the middle, an additional factor of difficulty, right? So is it a master search? Yeah, definitely. It's laid out as a master search. Is it on the easier end or harder end? It's definitely on the harder end of searches, right? But it is still there. And if the dogs know how to sniff through the top, inhaling from the top, and you recognize, okay, what is like asking, right? What are we creating versus source? And we can normally do much better with that. All right. So consistently inconsistent is kind of the theme of Buried. I think that with the changes, we should be getting a little bit better with this, that it won't be quite as inconsistent, hopefully. We'll see how it goes, but we'll see. So setup choices that are occurring that can cause some problems. The surface itself, is it hot? Do you need to put booties on your dog? Because that's the only surface that the club has available. I personally train my dogs with booties so that they can just throw them on and I don't have to think about it. Just allow that to be part of the game, right? Visual block causing airflow turbulence. We talked about that. The aging time, 10 minutes minimum. Where are you running in that run order? Inside versus outside. I think all of these things matter. This is a debrief, and I'll make sure that you guys have the link, but it is in the judges debrief in Facebook. So I have posted this. It's a very interesting kind of search. It was an excellent search. I really enjoyed judging it, and my Q rate was pretty decent. I think I put it in here. No, I didn't. Oh yeah, 13 out of 28. So not the best, but not bad. It's excellent. And what was really interesting about it is we had one hide, I believe it was like right here, one hide right here, and then the other hide was over here. And the challenge that I set for this one's in the sun, swirling around, and the dogs had to separate it from the containers nearby. This one was off the threshold, and most of the dogs were able to understand it. It's a nice solid sand hide. It behaved exactly as I was hoping. And then this one is a little bit further out in the open. It's all kind of under an overhang, staying nice and cool. But the dogs were using this corner as well as this corner and then this container in order to come back to the hot container. So it's just seen that there's a lot of variation between all three hides, and that can happen within the same search. Even though it's a U shape, you're starting from the side. It looks almost like a line over here. So if we're thinking about a pattern, recognizing that you're coming in into the middle of the U and we have to go left and right, which can add additional difficulty that we don't really think about. We don't plan for, we don't understand necessarily when we're just walking up to the start line. That is an additional level of difficulty. All right, oops, we don't need to do that. So the last piece of this is you have luck. Buried is always going to have an element of luck. Is it lucky because the wind is in your favor, or is it super windy, or is it gusting and then dying? Is the sun in your favor? Is it blasting? Is it half of the search area? Is it causing problems? Humidity, nice amount of humidity, too much humidity, too little. Changing throughout the day. When are you running? What is your luck? Aging time, you don't have control, right? You just get to run, whenever it's set. And then dog spilling hot water or sand before you. It happens. And so if you're stressed about that because the dog spilled the hot water and you're running next, I think we need to train it. Make it so that you understand what that looks like. Make it so that your dog understands what that looks like. It's a little overwhelming potentially because there's a lot more odor in the environment. But I've done this in classes. I've purposely had spilled hot water near where a hide is, or around where hides are, or nowhere near a hide. And the dogs can do it. And I really haven't seen all that much false alerting. It's just understanding, what does that odor picture look like? Dog pawing, dropped food, loads of slobber, all of that can happen for the dog that's happening before you or maybe your own, right? So that's sometimes luck. And we have to understand that that piece is in this game. It is not 100% reliable, that there's always going to be a small element of luck. Going left versus right is the most common one. All right. So if you want any more, especially on Buried, I'm part of a panel on December 15th. So it's a few months away with Scentwork University. And we're going to talk about Buried and HD. So I think it will be a fun conversation. I have no clue what part I'm talking about, but that will be good. That's coming up. And that's through Scentwork University. And I'll advertise on my page when I get the links. I have trial prep coming up next, and that's open on Friday. And it starts on the 22nd, and Novice Scent is the other class that's starting up, which we do talk about Buried. We have a whole class on Buried. And so if you're doing Novice Scent, you get to post videos for review. Online coaching, Zooms, which I've got a ton this week. And then I also do personalized video review and training planning, all that kind of fun stuff. Trial video review, and then classes are starting to come up pretty quick here. And they all have emails, everybody who's in that. All right. That's all I've got. Do we have any questions from you guys? Everybody's been quiet, having fun.
I have one when you were doing shell game when you had the cardboard cutout,
Mhm.
and I'm definitely going to spruce that up for the upcoming trial. Should I like if, say you take three containers, did you have like the cardboard cutout for each of those, and so the cold ones had it too, just so that
Yeah.
yeah, the dog doesn't
Yeah,
get
because the
smart.
dogs get wise. And if you
Yeah.
don't want to spend all the time to do it, do at least half of your cold containers to have them. So if
Okay.
you have like 5 containers or 6 containers, make 4 of them have cardboard. One is hot, the other
Mhm.
ones are cold. So then at
Okay.
least you have enough variation. Your dogs learn to ignore the sand without the hot or the cardboard, which is not a bad thing in my mind. But we just make sure that the only one that has cardboard isn't just the hot one.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Yeah. Don't let them get too smart. Any other questions?
Mhm.
You guys are all going to rock burieds?
Huh.
I think most people are from here.
Need to practice, Barry. That's my biggest problem is a place
It's
to
practicing.
it's
Yeah.
practicing. I don't have the stuff to do it yet.
Yeah. So the containers that I recommend are shoe boxes from Walmart or Target. It's Sterilite, like they're the plastic shoe boxes that we use as containers in so many other places.
I have one.
But those containers are so much smaller and lighter when you have 1 inch of sand in them that you're going to be more likely to use them. Um, Amazon, yeah, has them as well. And you want to get the Sterilite version that have a solid lid because if you buy like dollar store version, they splinter. Like they're not good containers at all. So if you've got the Sterilite versions, and then for the lids, like the lids that I had here in this, let me see. So in here, these lids, these were cut out for original like AKC. When we did our very first trials, this was novice AKC containers, and we had to fill them with sand. We were allowed to use the smaller one. So I spent a half hour on each one of these screens, and they're zip tied in, and I had like cuts all over my hands. They're really nice and sturdy. Like you could see Tana standing on them, but they're a pain in the butt and a lot of work. So what I do recommend typically is just use like a hot nail and punch some holes in it, or just like don't cut yourself, but an X-Acto knife on a card or on a nice plywood surface, you can cut like holes into it or squares. They don't have to be pretty, they don't have to be perfect. You can do it with slits, you can do it with so many different options. Typically, I melt lids because I find that they don't crack on me. So if I can use like a hot nail or a hot, I've heard of somebody using a hole saw and heating up the hole saw end. It's a dead one that their husband's not going to kill them, but you can cut holes essentially through the top and they can be a little bit larger holes and that works just as fine. The whole goal is that they're getting to the middle. Now, if the only hole that you have really is in the middle of this and it's all solid all the way around, whatever, that's now your cardboard top. Honestly, I don't think it's that big of a problem. I think eventually you're probably going to have to put some holes around it a little bit so that the dog isn't just getting information from that and only that. And then they see a screen and they go, oh, what's this? It's a little different. So I think we do need to have a little bit of transition, but you don't have to necessarily put a full screen on it. I have seen these are size of a quarter baking cooling rack that I've seen rubber bands tied around. That can work too. Right? There's a lot of ways to do this. You can get pretty ingenious. I've also seen quarter baking racks on these containers and then zip ties on the sides. And you can get some zip ties that are removable. And so then if you do the zip ties on the side and it just clamps down, that works just as fine. Your cold containers, you never are opening unless you've got food in them, right? Your hot container is the one that you're putting hide in and taking hide out. I do recommend that you pull your hide out of the container when you're not using it. Okay. If you keep your hide in the sand when you're not using it, you will create a very hot sand, which sometimes is not so bad. We're really teaching a lot of confidence on berries. But if you want to say, oh, I want to be training a little bit more for the trial, that they're going to have much colder sand, less hot sand, that the effect of where the hide is going to be a little more prominent than the whole thing is now hot. So that is something to consider. Make it easy. Easier you can make this, the more likely you're going to do it. And I find the cardboard tops, you don't always even need the screen on top. I just throw cardboard top on, especially if I'm just doing some quick reps with my dogs. Now, if they're really pawsy, that cardboard goes flying, we probably need a screen, right? It all depends on how much cleanup you want to make and how destructive your dog is. Any other questions? You can type them in the chat. It's great.
Do you think, Alex, that putting a smaller container, like a yogurt container or a cottage cheese container with sand or water in it, is coming close to the cardboard with the hole in it because you're only having odor in the middle?
Yeah, I do. The only thing that I worry about that situation is with dogs that might knock things over is you're like playing pick up sticks all the time,
Right.
right? If you have a dog that's not going to disrupt it and you can get away with that, by all means, I think it is the easiest way to do it. I've got bigger dogs that as they're learning the whole, like even George, with him trying to be polite, the whole thing is going to get mushed around, right? Yeah. I would not recommend pantyhose as a screen. You're just going to get a lot of runs in your pantyhose. It was what we were allowed to at the very beginning. I would not. There's a reason why we went away from it, like within like months. I think it was disallowed. Yeah, that was a
Do you,
bad idea.
do you have any suggestions as to where you can buy sand where you don't have to buy 50 pounds?
Nope.
Nope.
Nope. I didn't say this, but the side of Home Depot has those huge containers of sand sometimes.
Oh,
Maybe you can barter a deal and say, hey, all I need is like this coffee cup size, right? Like you don't need a lot, right? So if you can kind of talk to them and see if you can get like, it's not that expensive is the thing. It's just heavy,
it's just heavy. It's a lot of
heavy.
sand that I
I
don't.
mean, yeah, you can get 20-pound bags on Amazon, but it's so much more expensive.
Yeah.
You might as well take
Um,
the 50.
Lowe's versus Home Depot as well. So Home Depot are the big plastic bags, I believe, and
Okay.
Lowe's are the paper bags, or maybe it's opposite. I can't remember, but one is actually a smaller size.
Okay.
I can't remember who has which. Yeah. Yeah, so sometimes Sally's saying that sometimes they've got some torn bags that you're allowed to take some. So talk to a like one of the guys in there and say, like, I really don't even need this big bag because I can't carry it. It's too heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go into Home Depot with your little knife and cut a bag and then say, oh, look, this one's torn.
No, I'm not recommending that. That's bad.
Let me know when you're doing that. I'll show up.
Okay, all right. Well, you can be
Terrible,
right
you
behind
guys.
me.
There's a good
Terrible.
playground near my house too.
Yeah, well, you've got a lot of other smells in that then.
Mm,
Yeah, that's where the problem happens. Yeah.
yeah.
Go for it, Stacy.
So I had to step away for a minute, so I'm going to apologize in advance if somebody's already asked this question during the webinar.
Yeah.
But so I typically train like a lot of I think the suggestions that you've done where I usually will just take the shrink tube and just like push it
Mm.
down in. Do you think that for those of us that have been doing buried for a while, that there's going to be any changes to the way our dogs are reacting with the new change in January with the lesser
October.
amount or October, I meant. Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It'll be at our November.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really
expecting less.
think it's
Okay.
going to be so I'm comparing because realistically, how I train is what they've changed to.
Right. And that's what
So,
I've been training too, because
yeah,
that's what I learned from you. So I wondered if that was going to help us
I think it's
or
going to help.
okay.
Yeah, because I think the dogs that have done a lot of work with deep hides, I'm just going to change the picture because I want to look at a good picture. I think the dogs that have been working a lot of deep hides and have gotten less confident about which container is hot, right? So like the sand was too light or not hot enough. And so then they're starting to doubt in the training system. Then I think they're starting to look to the handler too quickly, right? I think if the dog, like what you've been doing and I do, is really confident from day one and working a lot of very clear which container is hot, kind of buried containers. So then when the dog walks up to a buried container, they go, oh, this one's hot and this one's not. And then we slowly introduce less odor because it's getting a little deeper or the conditions are changing. But I think you have a lot more confidence going in. And so then the dog is less likely to turn to the human and more likely to have resilience to figure out the problem.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
cool. Love the shell game idea with buried, minimal effort. Yes. But how is it to have multiple hides for trial prep? You can do a lot of the multiple hide stuff with normal containers. So like if we're talking containers two next to each other, like I think it's totally worth it. Like here's a circle kind of setup that I did with Tana, and I've done these a lot. I like circles a lot for training, because I can do two hots next to each other, right? So you could definitely do that, and maybe you do that if you're doing, hey, we're doing like buried deep dive. So if you're doing buried twice a week or three times a week, one of those times you could be doing something else. And the rest of the time is the shell game. Shell games are really good for sourcing and precision of the container. So if the dog is struggling with that aspect of how to play buried, then it makes a lot of sense to do a lot more shell game. Because if the dog is going to the containers and sniffing the side, I'd be like, I'm not running any full container searches. I want to make sure the dog is sniffing the top before I put them back into a full container search. If the dog is struggling with pooling, I want to make sure they're sniffing from the top. If the dog is struggling with handler focus or taking cues from the environment or people, then I want to make sure that we do a lot of shell game. If the dog is going to the top and sniffing the tops really nicely, then let's make sure that we're doing different environments, we're doing different surfaces, we're doing the different kinds of elements where we have multiple hides. Because I think the multiple hide aspect of it, there's not a ton of convergence typically set in buried. That's not the purpose. Maybe it will be if dogs are doing much better in the element because we've simplified it. We'll see. But typically, what I see is judges just want success. And the hardest part, especially at the highest level, is just knowing how many hides you have and the dogs being able to identify is it hot or not. And I find doing a lot more shell game makes the dog rely less on the environment and odor picture. My dogs are air centers all day long, but I have taught them through a lot of reps, because this is not natural for them to sniff the tops of every container. The more that I've done that, the less they're going to the environment, the more likely they're just going to inhale and they don't get confused and turned around by all the other things. So it really doesn't even matter if there's convergence. If they're able to inhale from the inside of the container, it just answers the problem really quickly. So I like to lean further onto shell games and then every once in a while get things together and say, okay, we're going to put a search together and I'm focusing on gravel and a corner or bushes and grass or whatever it might be, so that you're purposely going out with different kind of concepts that you want to go out and work. Good question.
Hey, Alex, for excellent level, playing the shell game, would you suggest four containers, two water, two sand,
Yeah, yeah,
and
for
then
sure.
two hots?
Yeah, yeah, one sand,
Okay.
one hot,
Okay.
one water hot. And make sure your water is just smells like water. Don't
Okay.
need much more than that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. You can get away. Like I've done a lot of prep with just sand, but it's not bad to put in the water. And like if your dog is struggling with water and it coming off and creating like pooling problems, you could set a water hide and let it age for 2 hours, blowing on other blank containers around, and you only have the one hide. And then purposely face a cold container, right? So we're putting all the pieces in to make it as hard as possible. But if your dog is really struggling with pooling, is it you the problem and odor, or is it just odor, right? And so we can kind of take some of those pieces and play with them. Yeah. Any other questions? Good question. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me. I think we did this in a pretty good amount of time. Lots of things to think about with buried, but I think hopefully you guys have a little bit more options. And I do think with the changes that we've got with the AKC, I think it's going to be a little even more consistent with great training. So it's kind of nice. They've kind of eliminated some of the inconsistencies that we were really seeing. So Hopefully it's better. I know they were doing it because of weight, but I think it's going to cause a little bit more consistency, which is good. That's the goal whenever we're trying to set things as judges. So, all right. I'm going to stop that recording. Thank you, guys.